Episode 11. The Famous Boy. Me? Jacob looked confused as he pointed to himself. Susan nodded. Wow. The crowd gasped loudly, and murmurs spread across the classroom. The pretty teacher who caught every student's attention, and also the one who didn't give anyone any attention barring teaching her class, was acting out of the ordinary. Jacob being called out by her was shocking, and not only Jacob came in the limelight once again, he was getting shocked and envious looks from all the boys in the room. Susan nodded at Jacob without saying a word. She grabbed her lecture notes and walked out of the classroom. Jacob followed her, having no idea what on earth Susan had in mind for him. Walking through the hallways and passing the overbridge between the academic buildings, Jacob walked into Susan's office as a crowd of students looked at him with curiosity. Susan was a bit of a celebrity in the mechatronic engineering department and the university as a whole, owing not just to her beauty, but also the fact that she was single. Susan took out a key and opened the office door. Jacob smelled something refreshing as soon as the door opened. There were 6 or 7 pots of plants on the windowsill. The antique wooden furniture was far different from that provided by the university. It looked like Susan had bought them herself. The decoration of the entire office was elegant and graceful, making it seem like her own little world. Having her own office when most of the teachers had to share with each other showed that Susan's status here wasn't ordinary. All those carved chairs and shelves looked pricey. Susan's family seems to be well off, Jacob thought as he observed the office. Susan closed the door and placed her lecture notes on the table. She pulled out a rosewood chair and sat down gracefully. She looked at Jacob and asked, "Where are you from?" "Mechatronic engineering," Jacob answered. Jacob looked around the office and thought that he was probably the first student who was lucky enough to be here. "Don't try to avoid the topic," Susan stared at Jacob and said. Jacob was confused. He was a student of the mechatronic engineering department. Where else could he be from? Susan looked annoyed now as her otherwise pretty-looking face twisted into a nasty scowl. She took her slender hand and grabbed Jacob's wrist tightly. It didn't seem like she had that kind of strength, but Jacob knew he couldn't move his arm even if he tried. "As I expected, your element is water. Tell me, where do you belong? River, stream, lake, or ocean?" Susan moved closer to him now, and all Jacob could think of was how many guys would die of jealousy right now if they saw this. Jacob was too confused and distracted to answer. "If you can't answer me, I have enough reasons to kill you," Susan said with a shrewd expression, and her eyes made Jacob's body shiver with fear. Susan continued to glare at Jacob and minced her words in anger. "How can this be happening? How can a normal being like you give out the aura of a dragon? How did you learn the cultivation technique?" She moved away from Jacob and sat back into her chair. Jacob hesitated for a moment and said, "I learned it from Liam Davis." Susan frowned in surprise. "Oh, is that so? It is a bit weird that a normal human can mingle with the likes of a prominent dragon clan. How do you know Liam?" Jacob was tired of all the new information he had been receiving the past few days. Feeling overwhelmed, he threw his hands in the air in despair and said, "I'm not sure if I should be talking about this anymore. Who are you?" "I'm an inspector, and it seems that you don't know much anyway." Susan rubbed her head as if suppressing a headache. She waved at Jacob to leave, saying, "You can go now. I'll have a word with Liam." She made it look like she was in a higher position than Liam, despite him being the vice principal and her being a teacher. Jacob was totally puzzled as he got up to leave. He was about to go out the door when Susan said, "Though you're new, I still need to warn you that I won't hesitate to kill you if you reveal our secrets to the world." Phew! Jacob drew a long breath of relief after he shut the door to Susan's office. As soon as he reached his dorm, he was flooded with questions from the university boys who had gathered in the room. "What did Susan ask you?" Why was she looking for you? Did you go to her office? Don't try to keep anything from us, dude. Did you do anything that drew her attention? Jacob was surrounded by them, but he didn't part with any information as he didn't forget Susan's warning. Realizing they couldn't get anything from Jacob, the boys decided to turn to his roommates as they were his closest friends. However, Sam and the other two didn't know what Jacob had done to catch Susan's attention. The four of them were always together when they were at the university, but they didn't notice anything else Jacob did that would interest someone like her. As a consequence, Jacob going to Susan's office had become a mystery among the students. Jacob brought them a lot of gossip and surprises these days. Gradually, people started to think that Jacob was someone special. However, as the person involved, Jacob didn't join in the conversation with the others. He was wondering what they would think about him if they found out that he still had the vice principal's visiting card. It was late in the evening by the time the curious boys dispersed from Jacob's dorm room, leaving the four roommates to themselves. However, they were all way too excited to fall asleep. Especially Sam, who kept asking Jacob what was with him and Susan. Jacob could make an excuse to fool the others, but it was hard to lie to Sam and his other roommates. But he thought it was safer if he remained silent and did not give Susan a chance to kill him. All the visitors are gone, and we're like your brothers. Jacob, can you just tell us what Susan asked you for? Sam asked sincerely. The other two strained their ears, hoping Jacob would spill the beans. Please stop talking about it and get some rest. Jacob sighed and felt very helpless. That is so unlike you. You tell me everything. Sam was deeply disappointed. Dude, you have been so secretive lately, said another roommate. Jacob couldn't help it. He used to be able to talk about anything with his friends, but in this case, there was nothing he could do. But you do seem to have some luck with the ladies for sure, said the fourth roommate all of a sudden. The lights of the dorm were switched off, and the four guys were talking in the dark and weren't tired at all. Yeah, I think our class president, Kathy, is interested in you too, the roommate continued. How come? Asked Jacob. Finally, a topic he could participate in. She keeps turning around to look at you nowadays. Don't tell me you didn't notice that, Sam chimed in. Make your move if you like her. What's the point of hesitating? The fourth roommate insisted. Don't be silly. I think she's just concerned about a fellow classmate, said Jacob. Jacob felt a bit panicky. He really didn't care too much about these things anymore. He felt that he got involved in something he wasn't supposed to. Now he was unable to get away from it, and there would be danger waiting for him at any time. Class crushes were hardly something on Jacob's mind. Don't you like Lisa, the most popular girl in the school? Teased Sam. That is all you, all right? I never liked her, said Jacob. But she is indeed beautiful. Someone else in the room likes her too, doesn't he? Don't you talk about me, said the third roommate. You were the only one all over her, Sam. Yeah, Sam is the ladies' man, teased the fourth roommate. The boys continued to talk and laugh until the morning, which left Jacob no chance to go out and cultivate at midnight. But he enjoyed spending time with his friends. It seemed like it had been forever since he had a normal conversation, let alone a night of banter. The next day was Friday, and they were all pretty close to the weekend. However, the only topic on everyone's lips was Jacob and Susan. Even Kathy, who never talked in class, was quietly discussing with the girls around her from time to time. Jacob could tell that she was talking about Susan from the annoyed looks she gave him. The teacher couldn't concentrate on the subject at hand as the students continued to discuss the hot topic. Although he had warned them a few times, it didn't stop the murmurs. It will probably be over by this weekend. They're just too bored, I guess. Last time when an attractive guy from fourth year began flirting with Lisa, everyone was talking about that with great interest. However, they switched their interest to something else in 2 or 3 days. Spinning his pen, Jacob hoped in vain. There was a knock on the classroom door, and the teacher, who was already annoyed with the students making noise, opened the door angrily. He was ready to lash out on the student who had dared to come this late to the lecture, but he was shocked to find Vice Principal Liam Davis standing outside. Sir Liam, please come in, the teacher said quietly and took half a step back involuntarily. Liam kept a straight face and walked in. He looked at the teacher and then at the students in the class before asking, "How can a class be so disruptive and loud?" Seeing the vice principal enter the class, the students stopped talking completely. No one ever expected him to visit the class, and unfortunately, the class was being unusually loud when he was walking by. Liam's eyes were sweeping over the students in the class. When he made eye contact with Jacob, Jacob couldn't help but shiver. He felt his body freeze up for a moment. "Get your class under control and teach it well." Liam left promptly with these words. The students looked at each other in despair, and no one dared to talk again. The teacher felt such a relief at that moment and nodded with satisfaction as he saw that all his students were finally quiet. He could now teach in peace. Jacob gave a sigh of relief as well. He had a feeling that Elder Liam had come here on purpose, but he was glad he left him alone. The lunch break came pretty quickly once the class was quiet. However, Jacob and his friends did not have another class that afternoon, which meant they were free to go home or stay at the university and chill. They all decided to head back to the dorm and play cards. As they walked from one academic building to another to get to their dorm, they passed by the gate and saw a limousine in the parking lot. They approached the car and started talking about it. "So there's an arrogant rich kid getting picked up by a car like that, huh?" said Sam in a condescending tone. They had heard about a handful of rich kids at the university who got picked up on weekends by BMWs, but it was the first time for them to see someone getting picked up by a luxury car like this one. It wasn't prom, it was just a weekend. Why a limousine? Not only the four of them, but all the other students who lived in the dormitories had never seen a car like this and were admiring it as well. Whoever walked by the gate slowed down either intentionally or unintentionally in order to see who was getting picked up by the car. "Is someone trying to show off by getting picked up in this kind of car?" Laying his arm on Jacob, Sam said disdainfully as they approached the car. "Yeah, obviously they're showing off," said Jacob. There was nothing wrong with maintaining a low profile, especially at a school or college. They turned around to go to their dorm when the car doors suddenly opened. Two tall men in black suits and a short elderly man got out of the car. Seeing the old man, Jacob got bitterly disappointed, because he had seen this elder at Sophie's father's office. He was Elder Frank, the old and disrespectful man Sophie hated so much that she wished she could tear him apart. "Jacob, Miss Sophie's family has invited you for a visit," the elder said, with a twinkle of joy in his eyes. Episode 12. Welcome to the family. Jacob stared at the old man, stupefied. Sam and the others, however, suddenly let go of his arm and stepped away to stand at a distance from him. There were quite a number of students walking by the dorm entrance. Some had just got back from their classes, and the others were leaving for home with their backpacks. The others were simply curious about the limousine. They all started staring at Jacob curiously as the uniformed man and the elderly man approached him. Jacob was completely embarrassed, but he kept silent. "Please get in the car," Elder Frank said to Jacob reverently. "No!" Jacob's stubbornness exploded as he shouted. "What the hell is this? I didn't even get a notice beforehand." Jacob wasn't pleased about this at all. "My son, you are already engaged to Sophie. It's best not to act irrationally on these things," said Elder Frank. Although none of the other students were within earshot of their conversation, Sam and his other roommates could hear each and every word. "Engaged?" They couldn't help but say it out loud. "Who's Sophie?" Sam asked the others, confused by what was happening. But they simply shook their heads blankly in response. "Would you like us to keep waiting here?" Elder Frank asked kindly. "All right, you win." Seeing a crowd of students gathering, Jacob quickly got into the car without wasting another second. The black limousine drove away from the entrance along with Jacob. "It will be hard for it to be low-key after this," thought Jacob. What's the deal with Jacob? Sam spoke up as the car drove out of the university gates. The vehicle drove smoothly through the city for a little while before it arrived at a 2-story house. No one would think of it as the house of a rich family by its unpretentious look. The vehicle stopped, and Elder Frank got out of the car along with Jacob. He rang the doorbell. "Come in." A cheerful lady wearing an apron opened the door and said softly, "I've brought him, madam. I'm heading back now. Please call me if you need anything," Elder Frank told the woman politely. "Yes, thank you, Elder Frank. I won't keep you from your work. It seems like you are about to break through the 9th level of Purple Light Scroll. I won't waste any more of your time," she said softly. "Thank you, madam." Elder Frank curtsied, sat back inside the limousine, and drove away. The woman smiled at Jacob, who was at the door, and said, "Come and sit down." She had a warmth in her smile and a friendly face. Her hair was tied up elegantly as if she had just walked out of a painting. Seeing her, Jacob forgot about all the unpleasantness that had happened just a few minutes ago. "Oh my!" he exclaimed as he walked into the house. He stepped into the living room, which was cozy and luxurious. "You haven't eaten yet, have you?" She guided Jacob inside the house and asked. "No, not yet," he answered politely. He couldn't be annoyed anymore after this kind of treatment. Talking to this lady reminded him of his mother, who he hadn't seen in a long, long time. "I'm Helen, Sophie's mom. Her dad has gone to pick her up from school, and they should be back soon. Go ahead and take a seat. I'll go cook." She led Jacob to the couch and smiled. Then she walked into the kitchen. This must be the precise definition of what an understanding wife and loving mother is like, Jacob thought to himself as he watched her walking away. Jacob sat down and looked around the house. Even though it appeared to be plain and simple looking on the outside, the interiors and the decoration were elegant and resplendent. A white staircase to the left led to the bedrooms on the second floor. There was a study on the right. A large, dark brown bookshelf inside the study depicted how knowledgeable the family was. The rug in the living room was soft and plush. Jacob could judge how wealthy the family was by looking at the size of the medieval-styled chandelier that hung in the middle of the living room. The doorbell rang, and soon Jacob heard footsteps approaching the living room. Dracon entered with Sophie, and as soon as she saw Jacob, she gritted her teeth. Sophie was wearing her light blue school uniform. Though she gritted her teeth with hate when she saw Jacob, she wasn't surprised at seeing him. Her dad had informed her of Jacob's arrival. "Oh, you're here," Dracon greeted Jacob with a friendly smile. "Hello." Jacob quickly stood up and greeted him. He didn't really see Dracon as his father-in-law, but he had to be polite since he was a guest here. He glimpsed at Sophie, who was now sitting on the chair, pouting. Jacob shivered at the thought of getting engaged and falling in love with a young girl like her, not to mention their complicated background. "It's okay, Soph," Dracon said calmly and turned to Sophie. "You guys chat. I still have some work to do." He walked into the study and started going through some documents. Sophie stood on the carpet as she stared at Jacob. She looked like she wanted to eat him alive. "Let me warn you, I never agreed to marry you, so if you don't keep your hands to yourself, I am going to cut them off," she said aggressively. "The problem is, I never wanted to get married to you either, okay? What can I do when I've been kidnapped and brought here?" Jacob gave Sophie an angry look as well. He then thought to himself, should I be getting angry at a schoolgirl? Oh no, wait, she's my fiancée. Jacob gritted his teeth. "I'm going upstairs to play on my computer. Sit by yourself." Sophie gave Jacob a scornful look and began to walk towards the stairs. "Sophie, where do you think you're going? Go back and sit with Jacob now." Dracon's stern voice came from the study. Sophie gritted her teeth and stopped walking. She pouted after contemplating seriously for a while, rolled her eyes, and slowly walked back down to the living room as if there were thousands of stones tied around her feet dragging her down. She sat on the couch beside Jacob reluctantly. "We can watch some TV if you don't want to talk." Jacob looked at her reluctantly and turned on the television with the remote control. Sophie kept on staring at him angrily. Ignoring her, Jacob went on browsing the channels to find something interesting to watch. A kids' channel came on and the song Baby Shark began to play. "Is that good?" Jacob turned to her. "That's more like your taste." "How dare you!" Sophie reached out to grab something from the table to hit him with. "Sophie!" Dracon thundered out her name again from the study. He knew exactly what Sophie was doing. It seemed as if he had left a pair of eyes in the living room. Sophie kept down the vase that she had grabbed reluctantly, but her eyes were still fixated on Jacob. "I'm warning you, do not make me mad." Jacob smiled lightly. "You hate me that much?" Sophie pouted. "Well, I don't like you at all." "Me neither. You are always mad, and you are not all that pleasant to be around either. It would be a pity if anyone had to marry you," said Jacob. "How could you?" Sophie's eyes were wide as she looked at Jacob. "Stop fighting, you two. You are going to be husband and wife in the future." Helen walked out of the kitchen with a dish in her hands. "Mom, he is bullying me," Sophie said in a childish manner. "I saw it all, and you were the one bullying him. Now be nice to Jacob and make him feel at home. He has come here for the first time." Helen smiled softly and walked back into the kitchen. "Fine, good for you, you stinky uncle. Even my parents are on your side." Sophie had her scowl back on as soon as her mother left the room. "Why are you so reluctant in marrying me, by the way? Is it because I'm a stranger, or that you don't like me? Or is it because you have a boyfriend at school?" he asked as he thought about all the high school couples he saw on the street when he had gone to meet Sophie at her school. "She looked cute that day," thought Jacob. "Maybe if she was seeing someone, there might just be some way out of this," Jacob thought happily. He then thought about the bead in his stomach and felt disappointed all over again. He asked again, "Answer my question. Are you seeing someone, Sophie?" Episode 13. My Ferocious Fiancé. Sophie turned to look at Jacob's face and studied his features. She noticed his brown eyes and soft hair. For a second, she couldn't take his eyes off him and seemed to be studying his inquisitive eyes. Jacob cleared his throat and asked again, gently this time, "Sophie, are you dating someone at school?" "I'm not interested in any of them, and even if I were, they are nothing like me. They would never—" She bit her lip and said, "They could never realize how liberating it feels to be different, to be stronger, to feel the wind, to soar amongst the clouds." She trailed off, lost in thought. She snapped out of it and said, "Anyway, they aren't so mature that they could understand any of this." Jacob looked at her. "You're not exactly mature yourself, either." "Of course, I'm not as mature as you, Uncle." She emphasized on uncle on purpose to tease him about his age. He was a college student, after all. Jacob smiled and stopped grilling her. He turned around and looked at Dracon, who was busy reviewing documents in his study room. It was amazing to watch a dragon king blend into the regular world so seamlessly, and to be one of the best businessmen in the country, too. He had a hint of admiration for Dracon, and for his wife Helen as well, who was busy cooking a homely meal for all of them. He felt right at home. He was surprised at the sudden turn of events, but he had a good feeling about being a part of this family. He hadn't had that feeling in so long. "Dinner time," Helen called out from the dining room as she brought the last 2 dishes out from the kitchen to the table. Sophie's father, Dracon, put down the documents he was studying and walked out from his study. "Jacob, come eat with us," Helen said to Jacob gently. Sophie stared at Jacob and looked cross. She still wasn't comfortable with him being treated like family, much less his fiancé. Reading Sophie's mind, Helen said, "Don't make that face, dear." Even if Jacob isn't your fiancé, he's still our guest." She patted Sophie's head and nudged her towards the table. Jacob's brain froze again when he heard the word fiancé. "Sit down and eat," Dracon said to Jacob, as he himself sat down promptly as soon as he entered the dining hall. The table was just big enough for the four of them. Jacob felt a little awkward, but he couldn't resist their invitation. He sat on the chair opposite Dracon and sat down. "Are you busy at school?" Helen asked Jacob as she passed him the bowl of gravy. "It's going all right." Jacob answered, but felt weird. He had just met them. Why was he so comfortable eating at their house and interacting with them like a family? He racked his brain to start a safe topic of conversation so that it does not go back to Sophie and his wedding again. He finally remembered that he wanted to know more about the Dragon Clan, and now seemed like the right time to ask. "I know that you have a lot of questions about us, but I believe you will get used to it gradually," Helen said, as if she knew what Jacob was thinking. "Sophie is just in her second year of high school. Normally speaking, it's too early to talk about marriage at this age. However, marriage in your case has become time-sensitive. But it is not out of the ordinary to settle such matters in our circle at an early age. I must admit that Sophie's life is in your hands." Jacob was stunned. He began listening to Helen intently. "You swallowed Sophie's internal core. If we want, we could take it out by force from your body, but it will definitely cause you a severe injury. Sophie is a kind-hearted young lady, and she doesn't want you hurt at any cost, and nor do we. More importantly, she does not want you to bear the consequences because of her carelessness." Helen paused a bit here. Jacob couldn't resist looking at Sophie at this moment, and she met his gaze. "She may not be in love with me, she may not even know me all that well, but she has the makings of a good wife," thought Jacob. "So, we've decided to keep Sophie's internal core in your body and want you to start cultivating." Helen started speaking again. "However, I must mention that this is not entirely safe either. If you can't reach a certain level in a certain amount of time, in other words, if your body can't suppress the overflowing energy of the internal core, the aftermath will be dangerous as well," she said. Jacob became nervous when the elegant and gentle Helen suddenly turned so serious. "I don't mind telling you more," Dracon said abruptly. "Actually, there won't be any negative effects for Sophie if we take it out of your body and return it to her. Yet, in order to have other elders believe in us, I asked Elder Liam to lie. He told them that Sophie wouldn't be able to adjust to the dragon core after it has stayed in your body. If it was left up to them, they would not have hesitated to take away your life for her." After hearing his words, Jacob felt like he was amongst countless dangers. He was half a step away from heaven just a few days ago. Dracon looked at Jacob. "You have two options now. First, let us take out the core by force. This is a huge risk. Second, cultivate according to what we give you. There will still be a risk, but it will be much smaller." "What I want to know is," Jacob looked at Sophie, "how will Sophie be affected after losing it?" The way Jacob took Sophie's name, she felt a hint of endearment and concern in it. She liked that he cared about her, but she was still uncomfortable whenever she thought about marrying him. "There isn't any danger at the moment. However, 3 years later, when Sophie turns 18, if you can't open up all the openings of the dragon core and transfer half of the connate dragon essence back to her, she won't be able to live for more than 2 years," Dracon said. Silence suddenly struck the dining table. In other words, if we follow the second option, everybody has to take risks. Sophie won't have to take any risks with the first option, but it will be very dangerous for me. Is that right? Jacob asked. Indeed. Dracon nodded. The dining table was silent once again. Is it necessary to get married? Jacob asked, addressing the elephant in the room. That was the condition of the second option. If everyone chooses the second option, you guys could only accomplish the required rituals by marrying each other, Dracon said, slowly and uncomfortably. Marrying each other? Jacob thought about it for a second and suddenly understood. He looked at Sophie's face, which was as red as a tomato at the moment. He also understood Dracon's discomfort as he talked about it. Are there any other options? Jacob asked. Temporarily, no, Dracon answered straight away. Silence struck the dining table once again. Sophie, though much younger than me, betted her life on me. She doesn't even know me, and she did it anyway. Why should I hesitate now? Jacob thought to himself. Don't kill him, but I don't want to marry him either, Sophie spoke out suddenly. Clearly, it was bothering her. These two conditions can't coexist, Helen reminded her. Anyhow, I won't marry him. Sophie pouted her lips as her face turned red. Then should we kill him? Helen asked. We don't have to. Sophie bit her lips as she went back into a dilemma. After all, it was her mistake, and Jacob was innocent. Now, since you guys don't have any objections, let's follow the second option. Dracon hit the table and said, Let's eat. Daddy! Sophie still wanted to protest, but she stopped after looking at the expression on Dracon's face. Sophie, you have to take responsibility for your mistake, Helen comforted Sophie. I've done some research on Jacob. He's a great kid who is considerate and respectful towards elders. Your dad and I are very happy. Why else would we agree to this? As long as you are not stubborn or defiant, you will grow to like him. On hearing Helen's words, Jacob felt a smile come across his face. He was still feeling pretty awkward about the situation and was as uncomfortable as Sophie about their new life together. He never thought about a high school girl as a girlfriend, let alone be his fiancée. How's your grammar, Jacob? Helen asked Jacob suddenly. After confirming that Jacob would be Sophie's fiancé, she addressed him even more amicably. I'm pretty good at it, actually, Jacob responded, and thought that they would have known how good his English was since they had already investigated and found out everything about him. Well, Sophie is pretty good at all subjects, but gets stuck at grammar. Come tutor Sophie for English grammar every day for the time being and get to know her better, Helen said. Don't we already know enough about him? Sophie pouted her lips and said quietly. Jacob wasn't sure about coming here every night. Besides, he never had experience as a tutor before. At the same time, Sophie can also teach you about cultivation. I think it'll be great for everyone that you guys help each other out, Helen said. Sophie and Jacob had no way out of this, and they both knew they had to do this regardless of how they were feeling. Thinking that his cultivation was related to Sophie's life, Jacob wouldn't dare to be careless, even though he couldn't accept her being his fiancée just yet. He thought about it and said, Fine, but you guys don't need to send the car to pick me up. I'll come on my own. Sure, it's not too far from your college. There is a bus stop near your campus to bring you here directly. Helen smiled when Jacob agreed to her plan. It was a very sweet smile. Jacob turned around and looked at Sophie. She looked a lot like her mother and probably had the same sweet smile. But she hadn't smiled at Jacob yet, so he couldn't be sure. He kept looking at her and kept repeating the word fiancé in his mind. She might be unhappy now, but I sure can see the beauty on the inside, thought Jacob. Episode 14. Dining with the Dragons. The dinner went smoothly after the situation became increasingly clear to all four of them. However, the tension didn't seem to melt. Dracon was still worried about his daughter, Helen was trying to pacify everyone, Sophie was still pouting with the decision of her marriage, and Jacob, well, he was dealing with it all. The family began to eat after clearing the air, and slowly, light chit-chat about work and the weather began. During the conversation, Jacob learned that the interiors of the house were done by Helen herself. Helen's non-dragon identity was that of an interior designer, and she was a renowned name in her field of work. As Helen revealed more about her work, Jacob was surprised to find that one of the top 10 landmarks in Wisconsin was a masterpiece designed by Sophie's mother. It was the stadium shown in the promotional pictures of the admission brochures of his university. It just finished construction last year. Her father is a successful businessman, and her mother is an outstanding designer. The family is not just kind-hearted, but has also acquired wealth and have made commendable achievements. Even if they weren't dragons, Sophie had so many reasons to be proud of her parents. Jacob ate and thought at the same time. While dining, Helen was the one talking to Jacob the entire time. Dracon ate quietly beside her and would nod or add a word or two to the conversation. Sophie was eating with her head low, trying to focus on the food, but actually made a mess out of everything on her plate. Her peas were smashed, her chicken was in shreds, and her gravy and potatoes were well merged together. She clearly had a lot going on in her mind. "Are your parents out of the country?" Helen asked Jacob. "Yes, they should be back next month," Jacob answered. Helen thought for a few moments and said, "How about a meet-up between the two families when your parents come back?" Jacob's heart sank. He was only beginning to accept his new circumstances, and the fact that Sophie was going to be his wife in the near future, but Helen's request put him at unease again. He thought, if Mom and Dad find out that I found a high school girl and chose her to be my wife, I have no idea how they would react. Helen could sense Jacob's hesitation, but continued talking. "Since everything is settled, it's normal for the two families to meet, isn't it?" Jacob looked at Helen and understood her perspective as a mother. She was right, and they had every right to meet his family. Sophie couldn't take it any more and burst out saying, "I didn't say I'll marry him." "You have to be responsible for the mistake you made. If you hadn't run off after he swallowed your core, why would we be doing this at all? Are you being defiant because you want others to bear the consequences of your wrongdoings?" Helen's expression was still gentle, but her tone was firm and a bit harsh. Sophie stopped talking because she knew that she was in the wrong. Yet she was very unwilling to marry a complete stranger, that too a college man, for this kind of mistake. "Jacob is thoughtful, and I am happy with him being a part of this family." Helen looked at Sophie and said, "You're not a child anymore, and you can't always lose your temper every now and then. You have to start realizing your responsibility and being mature. How long can your dad and I protect you? We also want you to learn from what has happened. You can't continue to act like a spoiled child." Sophie looked at Helen with a sad expression when she heard her mother talking to her in a heated tone. She wanted to cry, but didn't want to disgrace herself in front of Jacob. All that she could do was bite her lip and endure it. Seeing Helen lecture Sophie, her father, Dracon, remained silent. He obviously agreed with what Helen said. Jacob felt that there was another meaning behind how Sophie's parents were treating this matter. However, Sophie was too young to understand. Are they trying to utilize this chance to entrust Sophie to me? Can it be that even with their capability and background, there are still some dangers that they can't talk about? Jacob thought. Jacob. Helen turned and looked at him directly and said, Sophie still has the temper of a child. Please bear with her in the future. Yes, I know. At this time, Jacob could only agree. Sophie's eyes turned red as if she was about to cry. Dracon sensed her feelings and said gently, Go get some rest if you're done with your dinner, Soph. Sophie nodded and went upstairs, climbing up slowly. Each thud of her footsteps resounded in the dining room. Jacob looked at her petite body moving upwards and then turned around to look at Helen and Dracon. Let her be alone for a while, Helen said. Jacob smiled awkwardly and began to focus on the remaining food on his plate. Honestly speaking, what do you think of Sophie? Helen asked after a few minutes had passed. She has taken a big decision at a young age, and I admire her courage. She is a wise girl, and I think she will do very well in her life, Jacob expressed honestly. He thought to himself, Sophie wasn't exactly acting mature right now, but who wouldn't want to run away from a situation like this at her age? You're much more mature than her. Please take care of her for us. Her father and I are usually busy as we have a lot on our plate at all times. That's why we don't have much time to take care of her. It has made her personality more stubborn and arrogant. Helen looked at Jacob and said sincerely, I'll do what I can, Jacob nodded. Even though he didn't really know how to take care of Sophie, he wanted to learn how to for her parents' sake, and of course, he had to ensure the safety of his fiancée at the same time. He could understand how Sophie was feeling right now. When he was young, his parents were also busy working and didn't take care of him much. Therefore, he was more independent and had been a bit self-centered as well. It was fortunate that he had a caring grandma who always looked after him, and that allowed him to have better memories of his childhood. Sophie had nobody that would pull her out of her cocoon. Could you go upstairs and keep her company? Helen seemed concerned about Sophie. Jacob nodded and immediately put down his fork and got up. He was done with dinner anyway. He climbed up the stairs, glancing at a few abstract paintings that hung on the walls along the staircase. Jacob walked slowly. It felt like he was inside an art gallery. Through a small window in the corner of the second floor, Jacob saw the tranquil and beautiful garden from a window, and couldn't help but admire Helen's sense of design. Sophie's bedroom was the first room on the corner of the second floor. Jacob could tell by the tiny pink toy rabbit hanging on the door. He stood at the door and knocked. No sound came from the inside. Hello, you won't let me in? Jacob stood there for a few seconds and asked. You can go complain to my parents if you want. Sophie's heavy voice came from the inside. Jacob smiled and took a few small steps on purpose to create the illusion of him walking downstairs. She quickly ran towards the door. She actually thought that Jacob had gone downstairs to tell on her and rushed to open the door. She ran out of the bedroom, wanting to drag Jacob from the stairs. However, she didn't anticipate that Jacob would still be standing at the door. She smashed right into his chest and lost her balance. Jacob grabbed her by the waist and caught her just in time. He bent low to meet her gaze and said, Could you not keep falling down all the time? Sophie felt the warmth of his strong arms and hands on her waist, and she let him move away the few strands of hair from her face. Jacob continued to talk while still holding her. Do you think I'm the kind of person who would tell on you? Sophie blushed hard and slowly began to raise her head and body. She straightened herself, and Jacob slowly let go of her waist, but kept looking at her. You sure look like a person who would tell on me, but I'm glad you didn't." She looked up at him and smiled. Jacob walked into her bedroom and got a playful slap from Sophie on the back. "Hey, where are your manners? Don't just randomly come into my bedroom." Sophie stood at the door and looked at Jacob. Jacob turned around to meet her gaze and came closer to her. "You have a problem with me entering my fiancé's bedroom?" "You..." Sophie stared at Jacob. She was hesitant, but somehow she didn't want him to go away. Jacob looked at her eyes. They were red, and it seemed like she had cried. He saw this and quit the idea of teasing her anymore. He pretended to look around her bedroom casually. A poster of Sophie as a kid riding on her father's back in his dragon form was hammered in on top of the bed. She had a wide smile across her face. Sophie's mother had tried to make the room cozy and pretty for her darling daughter. But the high school girl sitting on the bed, confused about her future, made it all seem fruitless. Jacob sat down next to her on the bed and joined her in her silence. Episode 15. Almost Friends. Jacob and Sophie had been quiet for some time now. Jacob was sitting right next to her on the bed and could feel her body heat on his left side. The fragrance of her body mist filled his nostrils, and for a few moments he was lost in thought. He had told Sophie to stop falling every now and then, but now he wanted her to, just so that he could catch her again and feel the warmth of her skin on his hands. Jacob turned his head towards Sophie and saw that she was deep in thought. It seemed that she was still upset, and this feeling wasn't going to go away that easily. He slowly got up from the bed to leave her with her thoughts. Just as he stood up, Sophie looked at him and said, "Where are you going?" Jacob turned around to look at her. "I'm just taking a tour of your room," he said gently. Sophie didn't answer him. She probably didn't know what to say. "I'll leave if you're feeling uncomfortable," Jacob continued. "No," Sophie exclaimed. "You can stay here," she said softly. Jacob knew she wasn't okay with the fiancé situation, but perhaps she needed a friend who could understand her situation because he was in the same boat too. "That's what I'll do, then. I'll be a friend," thought Jacob. He asked Sophie, "Is there anything to do around here?" Sophie got up from the bed and sat in front of the computer and reactivated the screen with her mouse. "We can play games on my computer," she said as the desktop wallpaper emerged. It was a picture of her in a bikini at the beach. Her delicate skin glowed radiantly under the sun amongst the blue waves. She had a bright smile, and she was sticking out her tongue in the picture. She seemed to love the beach, going by the happy picture. She quickly switched the screen, as she must have noticed that Jacob was looking at the picture. However, Jacob couldn't see her expression from where he was, but she was blushing. A little embarrassed, Sophie distracted herself by playing Plants vs. Zombies. She focused on continuing her last level, and as she did, she unintentionally forgot that Jacob was still in the room. Out of boredom, Jacob picked out a random book from the bookshelf across the room and sat down on a chair near the balcony. Soon, he too was lost in the book. Sophie suddenly remembered about Jacob and turned her head around only to see him read quietly. She couldn't help but glimpse at him in between the game. "He doesn't look like a bad guy. He is cute, too," she thought to herself as she looked at him. "But to marry him..." Sophie felt internally conflicted. She pouted as she carried on with her game. Time flew by as she fought through many levels. She was deeply focused on the game now, as more and more zombies kept showing up on her screen, and the pea shooters Sophie planted weren't enough to defeat them. She could do nothing but watch the zombies break through the door. She failed the level 5 times and finally got frustrated by it. She threw the mouse on the desk as if she was mad at her computer. "Don't take it out on the mouse," a voice came from behind her. She turned around to see Jacob standing behind her. When did he get here? She wondered. She couldn't control her blush. She blamed herself for being too focused and forgetting about Jacob. However, it wasn't completely her fault, as this was her bedroom, and she had always been alone in there. Her complete attention was at the game, and it made her forget about her fiancé. I can't get through this level, she admitted sheepishly. Plant 2 rows of sunflowers in the back. Leave an empty roll for ice pea shooters in the front. Plant another roll of pea shooters in front of that. Then, plant a roll of potatoes. Same in the water, except planting the lotus leaves first, Jacob said. That would never work. Sophie wasn't convinced. Your way isn't working either, is it? Said Jacob. Sophie pondered over Jacob's idea for a few minutes before she started the level again. She successfully passed the level using Jacob's strategy. Did it work? Said Jacob, who had returned to his reading chair. No, said Sophie. She didn't want him to think that he was right. Jacob stood up, pretending to go over and check. Sophie quickly exited the game in panic. However, her bikini photo was now in sight, and she bit her lip to control her blush. Don't look at it. Sophie stood up hastily to block his view. She was conscious about Jacob or anyone else seeing her in a swimsuit. Jacob chuckled and teased her. I've already seen the live version. Why can't I see the picture? Sophie gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. She hit Jacob on his chest. Thanks to the loss of her internal core, it wasn't a strong hit. Instead of causing pain to Jacob's chest, it felt like she had put her hand through a wall. Sophie smiled at Jacob's reaction because he was covering his chest and pretending to be hurt. Humph! I shall teach you another lesson if you say something like that again, she said playfully. She then sat down and continued with her Plants vs. Zombies game. Jacob was bored of reading, so he dragged a chair beside her and watched her play. Sophie was, in fact, bored of playing alone, so she was glad he came to watch her. Not to mention, she certainly needed some help with some levels. Plant a chomper here. Here, collect the sun. Here comes the last wave. Get the cherry bombs ready. Jacob kept on instructing on the side. So annoying, I know. Sophie blamed the hard levels as she did what Jacob said. Her hand was moving quickly with the mouse. The two of them were too focused on the screen to realize Helen had quietly pushed open the door a bit to take a look at them, and stood by the door for a while. She had smiled and left in delight after learning that the two of them were getting along. Time flew until they reached the last level, and soon it was dinner time. Helen knocked on the door. Sophie paused the game, and Jacob snapped out of the game as well. Okay, enough gaming. Time for dinner, Helen said in a gentle tone. Sophie turned her head to face the door to look at Helen, and then turned to look at Jacob. She suddenly realized they were sitting very close to each other, so when she turned, her face was almost touching Jacob's. She slowly moved away from him, her face turning red as she did. Jacob straightened himself as well. Sophie turned off the computer and hastily walked out of the room as she pretended to be calm. As she climbed down the stairs with him, she wondered, a few days ago, I did not like that guy at all. How come I was having so much fun playing games with him? Jacob was surprised at himself, too. They saw the table packed with delicious dishes when they got to the little dining room downstairs. It's late, and I should get going, Jacob said. Have dinner here, Dracon said in a calm tone. It sounded more like a command than an invitation. Would they keep me for the night, too, after dinner? Jacob thought to himself. But he quickly abandoned the silly thought and sat down. It was a usual family dinner where Helen and Dracon talked about the trivial things in life. Jacob was randomly listening in when they talked about things he didn't understand. Certainly, the couple didn't keep Jacob for the night after dinner. As he said his goodbyes, Helen turned to Sophie and said, Go see him off, Soph. Sophie stood up reluctantly. She was tired. She looked at Jacob and followed him to the door. Jacob turned around when they were on the crosswalk outside of their house. He told Sophie, "It's okay. You can go back now." "Oh, thanks, Jacob." She turned around to go back inside. "Sophie!" Helen's voice was loud and scary. Reluctantly, Sophie turned back again as she looked at Jacob sadly. Jacob and Sophie walked towards the bus stop 500 meters away without a word. The ruffle sleeves of her white t-shirt and her floral red short skirt was fluttering in the wind. Jacob looked at her and felt attracted to her. He found her sweet, cute, and sexy. If it wasn't for their awkward situation, he would have kissed her, or asked her out at the very least. They reached the bus stop and Jacob gently asked Sophie to head home. "I know you're tired. The day was pretty overwhelming," he said. "Yeah." Sophie nodded with her head down. She suddenly looked up and stared at Jacob for a few moments. Then she turned and began walking back to her house. Jacob realized that he didn't even have her number as he watched her walk away. Even though she was just a high schooler, she should have a cell phone by now, shouldn't she? He kept thinking about her on the ride back. Does she even like me? Episode 16. The new popular boy in college. Jacob was alone at the bus stop thinking about Sophie. The wait for the bus seemed really short, even though he had actually been sitting there for half an hour. He got into the bus, pushed open the window, and let the chilly breeze pat his face. He mulled over his situation. He had a fiancée that he didn't know much about, except that she was attractive and her heart was in the right place. Second, he was now a part of a dragon clan that he didn't know much about either, but he was to become a dragon soon enough. Lots of work and not a whole lot of time to do it. It suddenly struck him that he had forgotten to ask Dracon about their clan or anything about the cultivation techniques. He just met Sophie's parents as their son-in-law and spent some time with his future wife. Sophie's father seemed quite cold, but he did shoulder a lot of responsibility as a mortal and as a dragon king. It seemed normal for someone of his stature to have a tough exterior. Sophie's mother was a very kind and intelligent woman, and that's it. That's all he knew about them. Don't tell me that from now on I would have to go to their house for dinner every day, Jacob thought to himself as a lot of things about his new reality dawned on him. After thinking about his situation for a while, he got off the bus after 3 stops. He walked into the Fairview bookstore and carefully browsed the high school section and finally bought some textbooks and guidebooks such as English Test Bank and Grade 10 English Grammar. Walking out of the bookstore with a bundle of books in his hands after searching amongst the countless study guides on the shelves, Jacob was covered in sweat. He pitied the high school students who had to work so hard. As Jacob strutted back to the bus stop, he suddenly realized that the news about him being picked up by the limousine at noon in front of the dorm area would have reached every student by now. If he went back now, he wouldn't be able to get away from their endless questions. He was always trying to keep a low profile and didn't want to get too much attention from anyone in general. But recent events had made him one of the most popular boys in college. He immediately made the decision to go home instead and caught the first bus in sight. The bus ride was bumpy, but Jacob didn't care. He silently watched the twilight descending into night as he clutched hard at the study material in his hands. His thoughts were interrupted by a call on his cell phone. It was Sam. Jacob picked up the phone, and before he could say anything, Sam began yelling.
"Jacob, why aren't you back yet? Where the hell are you? It's getting late."
"I'm going home today, Sam. I'm tired." Jacob knew Sam would be waiting for him.
"Oh, tired, huh? Looks like our dude had a great time today."
Sam's voice went from concern to playful in seconds.
"What on earth was going on during the day? You left us all in shock, mystery man."
Nothing really. It was the relative from last time, asking me to have a meal at their home," Jacob answered casually.
Are you kidding me? You get picked up in a limousine and the old man tells you that you need to meet your fiancée and you say nothing's going on? Come on, man, tell me more.
Sam kept insisting. He was clearly excited to know everything. He went on trying to convince Jacob to confide in him, but Jacob knew he couldn't talk to anyone about his new world. He sighed silently as Sam went on. "Nothing major is going on, Sam, I promise," Jacob said when Sam finally let him talk. "I am just a bit tired, so I'll spend the night at my home and I'll tell you everything on Sunday."
Fine, we will wait for you to come back and continue our interrogation. We're not letting you off the hook so easily,
Sam said as he hung up the phone. Jacob was actually speechless about what Sophie's family did today. He wished that he could keep their circle a secret, but on the other hand, the way they acted was so eye-catching that it drew so much attention. But who could ever imagine how different their identities really are? The biggest geniuses of the world often lie to conceal their mission, but by keeping such a low and mysterious profile, it may draw even more attention from others. Jacob continued to wonder long after Sam had hung up on him. Jacob wanted to stop thinking about his new dragon in-laws for a bit, so he checked his cell phone. He wasn't surprised to see Sam's dozen messages and proceeded to delete them. There were a few from his class president, Kathy, as well. He sighed as he deleted those, too. What was the point? He already has a fiancée. He laid his head against the window and took a nap. It was very late at night when he got home. His grandma was surprised to see him because he never came home at this hour. But she was happy with the surprise and gave Jacob a big hug. He felt so light and unburdened in her presence that he almost blurted out about Sophie. But he bit his tongue and decided to keep it a secret for now. After spending the weekend peacefully with his grandma, he planned to go back to the university on Sunday evening so he could avoid the crazy gossip that must be going around about him. The big pile of sacks his grandma sent for his friends couldn't keep Sam and his roommates off his back. On hearing that Jacob was back, even the guys from other dorms flooded over. "Hey man, you made such a big scene. Getting picked up by a limousine? I heard that even the rich boy Malcolm from the advanced class doesn't get such a treatment," said Henry, who had welcomed himself into Jacob's dorm. "We heard about the fiancé. We know everything. Don't try to hide anything from us," said another uninvited classmate. "Even the girls were talking about you. They were saying that your family's filthy rich. Tia, a senior who didn't know you even existed, was also talking about you too." "Don't tell me that you hired some people to put on a show in order to cause a sensation." "Oh, that little girl was cute. What's her name again?" "Dude, you seemed quiet at the university, but you actually meet a lot of girls outside of campus, don't you?" They were beginning to take it too far. Jacob could only listen to them helplessly. All right. Stop making things up," Jacob finally spoke up. "Look, it was a practical joke set up by one of my old friends. The limousine freaked me out, too. I know it looked like a big scene, but it really wasn't. I'd tell you guys, wouldn't I?" Jacob heard the murmurs dying out and then said, "How about we all go out to eat? My treat." The guys were all disappointed because there was no gossip, but they all got excited about the treat. They all rushed out of the dorm building, dragging Jacob along. Although most of them had eaten dinner already, they couldn't resist the invitation for cheeseburgers at the diner close by. Jacob had no choice but to shell out some money to end the drama. After what seemed like a night of endless gluttony, Jacob was duly informed about the gossip that had happened after he had left in the limousine. They told him that not just Jacob's classmates, but the entire college was talking about him. They were taking guesses at who his fiancée could be. Bets were being placed in secrecy, and the rich kids caught wind of the news too. They were all set to rag Jacob, but he never showed up this weekend, so they couldn't. Jacob silently thanked his stars. Having dined and wined to satiety, the boys began to leave. Jacob was left with Sam and his two roommates. They were heading back to their dorm room, talking and laughing loudly and with their arms around each other's shoulders. The four of them stopped dead in their tracks as they ran into Vice Principal Liam and some other teachers of the university who were inspecting the dorms. Seeing the vice principal up close, the roommates who were laughing and singing songs became quiet. They were silently waiting for a scolding from him. To everyone's surprise, the vice principal smiled and waved at them, even though he saw that they were all drunk. Liam walked by them along with the other teachers, and the guys exchanged shocked looks with each other. "Did I just see the vice principal wave at us?" one of the roommates asked Sam, who seemed to have sobered up as soon as he saw the group of teachers. The other three simply stood there in shock, wondering about what had just happened. They thought that the vice principal would yell at them after knowing that they went out drinking, or would at least come up to them and ask which major and class they were from. But he just waved. "Strange things happen every year in this college, but they sure are stranger this year," said Sam, letting out a sigh of relief. Episode 17. Dragon Mother. Jacob looked at his phone, thought about something for a few seconds, and then put it away in his backpack. His nose was in the high school English test bank. Jacob and his batchmates were taking university-level English courses, but Jacob was doing high school English questions. Due to the small size of this course, Jacob shared this class with only one of his roommates, and the other two weren't taking this class at all. The schedule for their sophomore year was always packed, and the library was always crammed with students who always had their noses in their books. After spending another hour on the test bank, Jacob shoved the book in his backpack, checked for his cell phone and wallet, and left the classroom. He had to reach Sophie's house by 5 o'clock in the evening. Jacob was even more anxious than the other day when he was picked up by the shiny black limousine, which ended up with him spending an entire day with the Dragon King and his family. He arrived at their house and rang the doorbell. It was Helen who opened the door. She was wearing an apron and her hair was tied up in a bun. Her hands were wet and the water dripped onto the foyer floor. She was obviously busy in the kitchen. "So early?" She let Jacob in and smiled. "Sophie isn't back from school yet?" Jacob entered and asked. He was a bit embarrassed about being early. He lacked the experience of being a tutor as it was his first time, but then again he was also inexperienced in being a son-in-law, so no matter what he did, he would always be conscious or embarrassed. "No, her Uncle Kenneth, my husband's third youngest brother, is picking her up, because her dad is working late today," she answered, as if Jacob was already a member of the family. "Take a seat on the couch and watch some TV if you'd like. Make yourself at home." Jacob opened his backpack and put the study material for Sophie on the coffee table, and after thinking something for a few seconds, he turned to Helen and said, "Why don't I give you a hand in the kitchen?" "Okay, sure." Helen looked at Jacob with a surprised look on her face and then smiled. "Come along, then." Jacob rolled up his sleeves and went into the kitchen with her. He couldn't let her slave away in the kitchen while he chilled in front of the TV. Jacob entered the kitchen and found that all the ingredients and condiments were neatly stacked up. It meant that Helen was just getting started on dinner and hadn't actually begun cooking yet. Jacob did feel he had come too early, but at least now Helen wouldn't have to do it all by herself. Jacob could tell from the ingredients the kind of dishes she was going to make. He walked over quickly and started rinsing the vegetables and cutting up the meat without any instructions. He looked like an experienced chef in a restaurant the way he went about doing everything in the kitchen. "Jacob, you always help out at home, don't you?" Helen began prepping the chicken for the roast as she spoke. Not really. Sometimes I give my grandma a hand," said Jacob. "I could tell that you are a sensible kid." "If only my Soph had half your sensibility," Helen sighed. "She's still young. I only cared about games and gossip when I was her age as well," Jacob answered without even thinking. "Have your parents always been away?" Helen continued. Jacob answered honestly. "They are both always on the move and always busy, and I have spent most of my time with my grandma since I was a boy." Helen pondered.
Your grandma must be very lonely now that you spend most of the time at the university, right? I usually go to see her on the weekends.
Jacob looked up at Helen at this point and felt that there was something going on in her mind. Before he could draw any conclusions, Helen spoke up and said,
Once you and Sophie are settled, I can invite your grandma here to live with us.
That may be a bit too soon. Jacob smiled as he felt his cheeks go red.
She doesn't know about Sophie yet. She will find out soon enough. I know how much she would be looking forward to you getting married or bringing your girlfriend home to introduce her. Us grown-ups have only one intent once our kids grow up. That's how I know how she must be feeling. Take your time, Jacob, but do tell her, said Helen.
Jacob was about to say something, but he just nodded and began chopping the potato into thin strips. She knows exactly how Granny feels, Jacob thought. But this is all happening so fast. Jacob kept working quietly for a while when he remembered that he had a lot of questions for Helen. He thought this was the right time to learn a little about the Dragon Clan since no one was around. Plus, he was really comfortable with Helen. She reminded him of his own mother.
Could you tell me what role an inspector plays in the Dragon Clan?
Jacob asked in a straightforward voice.
Oh, you met an inspector?
Helen was a bit surprised.
A professor in my university. Her name is Susan, Jacob said. Oh, her,
Helen said in a matter-of-factly tone.
You know her?
Jacob was curious.
Inspectors are not a group of people who are easy to get along with, but Susan knows our family well, so she shouldn't cause you too much problem,
Helen replied. Jacob thought to himself, Inspectors? So there are more than one. Helen seems to respect them, too. Helen saw the curious look on Jacob's face and continued.
The inspectors are a group of authorized figures of the Dragon Clan who are in charge of supervising the internal events of the clan. They have the right to interfere with anything that's against the rules, such as bribing and murder. They have the right to handle the matter themselves before reporting them to the higher authorities, as long as they have evidence of the crime.
Wow, they seem pretty dangerous, like the king's knights when there were emperors ruling different countries, said Jacob.
Don't underestimate them. Many of them are above the heavenly level in the clan. Elder Liam is already a master of the North Atlantic Dragon region, but even 2 Elder Liams wouldn't even be able to defeat Susan, Helen went on.
Jacob didn't have a definite concept of a dragon's power, and neither did he know what their battles would be like. But Susan's power would probably be a lot stronger than he could ever imagine. Jacob had made up his mind about Susan being a dangerous person and that he should never be near her again.
How did she know about my identity? Asked Jacob. The fact is that we all have our auras. You are at a very low level to sense your aura, let alone sense someone else's aura. But Susan Suhan is an extraordinary inspector of the Dragon Clan. She can certainly see through you because she can read auras, Helen explained patiently.
Can't I hide my aura? Jacob asked immediately.
You can, but if the person is much stronger than you, they can still see it,
Helen said as if she knew exactly what was on Jacob's mind. She continued,
But don't worry, we are not allowed to kill each other within the Dragon Clan. Susan won't hurt you as long as she recognizes your legal identity. She would even protect you. Plus, you are now a part of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan, and we won't let you get hurt that easily.
Helen suddenly straightened her back and added confidently. Jacob was touched with the way Helen spoke to him. She had completely accepted him as her son-in-law. After all, why else would she welcome him to her home or promise to stand up for him if he was in danger?
North Atlantic Dragon Clan. Sounds like it's really powerful. Susan surely must have some respect for them despite her authoritative role. Does Sophie's dad hold a high status in the Dragon Clan? Jacob asked the question that had always been bothering him. He thought it was a good opportunity to ask. He's all right. He's the king of the North Atlantic, Helen said lightly. Drakon, the Dragon King of the North Atlantic, to be precise, she added as she put the chicken to roast. Episode 18. A Mere Mortal. Jacob was engrossed in learning about the mighty Dragon Clan while helping Helen out in the kitchen. The sound of the main door being opened interrupted their conversation. Sophie is back with her uncle. Why don't you go talk to them and I'll take it from here? Helen said softly to Jacob and gave him one of her endearing smiles. Jacob returned her smile and said, Sure thing. He walked out of the kitchen and entered the living room where he saw Sophie in her light blue school uniform sitting and giggling away with a bulky man with bushy eyebrows and big round eyes. Hello, sir, Jacob greeted Sophie's uncle politely. The man did not bother replying to Jacob, but instead he scrunched up his nose in disgust. Sophie didn't try to smooth things out either. She threw her backpack onto the sofa, ran to the kitchen, and started talking to her mom. Jacob felt like he hit a snag with Sophie's uncle within seconds of meeting him. He felt bummed out and found himself a bit annoyed at the man he had greeted so kindly. He sat on the sofa and tried to withhold his feelings by reading the study material he had been looking at since morning for Sophie. Minutes passed by, and suddenly the man said with a grunt, So, you're Jacob. Jacob did not take his nose out of the books yet and decided to ignore him. But, remembering Helen's kindness and the fact that he was to be married to Sophie, he looked up at Sophie's uncle and said, Yes, I'm Jacob. The man did not say anything, but continued to observe Jacob and did not take his eyes off him for even 1 second. Jacob didn't think about it at first, but it suddenly dawned on him that her uncle was observing his level of cultivation. He felt chills go down his spine as soon as he realized that. Useless. Swallowed Sophie's internal core and had so much time to cultivate, yet no changes to the body. The man mumbled loudly after a few minutes of observation. His words were harsh. Even though Jacob had a calm and collective nature, he couldn't hold back his anger when it came to his self-respect. He glared at Sophie's uncle. Sophie's uncle and Jacob were staring at each other aggressively when Sophie came out of the kitchen and said, Uncle, Mom's asking if you have any preference for dinner tonight. Ha ha, anything will be fine, Munchkin. I'm not picky. The man with his bushy eyebrows and big eyes suddenly turned soft like a little sheep while talking to Sophie. Okay, Sophie said as she turned around to go back into the kitchen. Mom, Uncle said anything will be fine. Cook whatever you want. Jacob noticed that Sophie's uncle had a twinkle in his eyes whenever he saw or talked to Sophie. It was obvious that he loved his niece very much. Sophie came back and skipped happily across the room to sit down next to her uncle and promptly said, Uncle, do you remember what you promised me in the car? All right, I'll give it to you. How could your uncle forget his promise after all, huh? The man took out a wallet from his pocket and handed her 10 $100 bills to Sophie. Don't let your father know about this. He winked at her. Sophie was beaming with joy as she stuck out her tongue and put the money in her little pink wallet. She then hugged her uncle around his neck and said, You are the best, Uncle Kenneth. You crazy little girl. Her uncle rubbed her head with joy, and his face was filled with love for his niece. They both continued to ignore Jacob as they got busy in their own conversation. Jacob knew her uncle was not happy with him, but he couldn't do anything about it. Plus, Sophie was much too excited and happy to even notice the tension in the room. Even if she did, she would side with her favorite uncle rather than the stranger she was unwilling to marry. Knowing that Sophie doesn't want this marriage, needless to say, her uncle would be even more defiant. "Great start in bonding with the family, Jacob," he thought to himself as he continued to ignore the two. He picked up the study material once again and pretended to read them as he brooded in anger. Helen broke the tension by calling them in the dining room for food. "Sophie, are you bothering your uncle again?" Helen said reproachfully to Sophie as she entered the room. Sophie was giggling and finally stopped playing the childish rock-paper-scissors with her Uncle Kenneth. "Come on now, you three. Dinner's ready," said Helen, and promptly left for the dining room. Jacob reluctantly walked to the dinner table. He felt angry and awkward dining with Sophie's uncle, but he couldn't say no to Helen. Plus, it would be rude to excuse himself now. He sat down and kept a straight face, disguising his anger. All four of them sat down to dine, and while Sophie sat across from Jacob, her Uncle Kenneth and Helen sat beside him. "This is Sophie's uncle, Kenneth. You can call him third uncle just like Sophie does. Like Elder Liam, he is one of the elders of the North Atlantic. Sophie can explain the details to you later on." Helen introduced the man to Jacob after she sat down. Jacob nodded curtly at Uncle Kenneth after Helen's introduction. Kenneth grunted in acknowledgement and began to serve himself. Helen noticed that the vibe wasn't quite friendly, so she said with a gentle smile, "All right, let's eat." She handed Jacob the vegetables as she talked, and became a bit more attentive after sensing the tension. Despite Helen's gentle temperament, Kenneth wasn't able to keep himself calm. He blurted out loudly, "Helen, my dear sis-in-law, what were you and Dracon thinking bringing this mere mortal home? Do you think he's worthy of a nice girl like Sophie?" "Jacob is a really good kid. I like him. I hope this reason is satisfactory to you, Kenneth," said Helen, gently as ever. "This..." Kenneth was speechless, as if an egg was stuck down his throat. It was at this moment Jacob realized that Helen wasn't as soft-natured as she seemed. She glared at Kenneth. She had a persona where she never repeated herself, and she looked like she was even more ferocious and dangerous than Dracon the Dragon King himself. Kenneth paused for a few moments and said, in a normal voice, "Others might not know, but I do. If he returns the internal core to Sophie, she will not suffer any harm." "But Jacob will suffer great harm," Helen replied sharply. "He's just an ordinary human, a mere mortal. Why should we care?" said Kenneth. "Enough!" Helen was angry. "Your brother isn't here, and you're arguing with me this way? This decision was agreed upon by the Elders' Council. Say no more." The fight over Jacob had put him in an awkward position. However, he felt his anger melting away now that Helen was defending him. "But..." Kenneth was not convinced. He wanted to keep on arguing. "About Sophie's problem, we have our own judgments on what happened. She has to be responsible for what she did. I know you love Sophie, but don't spoil her. You have to stop cleaning up after her each time she causes trouble." Helen's words were firm, and Kenneth finally stopped arguing. However, his face was still filled with disdain. Sophie's face kept turning red and pale back and forth, yet she remained silent as she didn't dare to speak up. "It's time for you to keep your temper under control. You're so violent. I would like to see how you are going to get through this year's tribulation with your habit of snapping at everyone around you," said Helen. Her tone was softer now. After a few minutes of pondering, Kenneth said softly, I still disagree with the decision of Sophie marrying a mortal. Helen let out a long sigh. She didn't want to argue any more. All right. We heard you, Kenneth. She looked at Jacob kindly and said, Let's eat. Episode 19. Sharing the Core. Helen broke the tension at the dining table after the heated argument between her and her husband's younger brother, Kenneth. The ferocious dragons couldn't keep their calm despite their best efforts. She began asking Sophie about her day at school, and Sophie, unlike her usual temperament, replied softly and in a sweet tone. Sophie knew that the argument had gone way too far. Jacob ate quietly and listened to their conversation. He noticed how alike Sophie and her mother looked. Usually, Sophie had a short temper and Helen was the cool and composed one. But today, it seemed that they had switched roles. Kenneth, on the other hand, ate his food noisily, still trying hard to suppress his displeasure for Jacob. Sophie's father, Dracon, seems to be a wise man with good leadership skills. Kenneth, his brother, in contrast, seems reckless and stubborn. He was poles apart from his older brother. He has handsome features just like Dracon, but his constant grouchiness is probably the reason for his ghastly appearance. Jacob judged the man quietly as he ate his food. Sensing Jacob's judgment, Kenneth raised his head and suddenly glared at Jacob. His bloodshot eyes scared him, and he didn't look up even once after that glare. Sophie and Helen were done talking by the time dinner was over, and they began to clear the table. Helen asked Sophie to go upstairs with Jacob to study, and they both understood that she wanted them to spend time together. But Sophie wasn't in the mood and said, I just finished eating, Mom. I still want to watch a bit of TV. No, Jacob will get late. He has to go back to his dorm in time, Helen said firmly, denying her tantrums and leaving no room for discussion. Sophie had just come from school and was in no mood to study, but she obediently climbed up the stairs to her room. Each loud thud of her footsteps made Jacob giggle. Sophie's face turned all red when she got angry, making her look adorable. She also flared her tiny nostrils while arguing, making her look even cuter. Jacob couldn't help but smile at the sight. Jacob laughed, grabbed the study material, and followed her upstairs. He didn't think of Sophie as his fiancée, but as a troublesome girl he liked being around. Unexpectedly, though, Kenneth began following them upstairs. Helen stopped him and asked, Why are you going upstairs? No reason. I just like the view from the top window. Kenneth scratched his head and answered as he continued to climb. It was obvious that he was worried about leaving Sophie and Jacob alone, and so he followed them to keep an eye on Jacob. He also wanted to see how smart this mortal really was and if he could actually teach Sophie. Helen clearly knew what Kenneth was trying to do. He wanted to go upstairs to kill the mood, but she couldn't do anything about him. She sighed and left the room. Jacob followed Sophie and entered her bedroom. He turned around when he heard Kenneth following them inside and rolled his eyes. I'm not going to eat her up, thought Jacob. Sophie didn't care about any of this. She just didn't want to study, but reluctantly sat at her desk. Jacob unzipped his bag, took out a test paper, and put it in front of her. Let's start with this test paper. I have a lot of assignments to do today. Sophie looked at Jacob with concern. We can do them after this, I promise, Jacob said in an encouraging tone. Humph. Sophie gave in. She took the test paper from him, grabbed a pen, and frowned as she got to work. Jacob had worked hard on the test paper, picking questions from a variety of other test banks to make a basic test for Sophie. He wanted to gauge how much she knew. Sophie bit the tip of the pen and did the questions one by one. Jacob dragged a chair, sat beside her, and looked at her quietly. Sophie's Uncle Kenneth sat on a chair right at the entrance of the room and watched the study session unfold. He tried to get a peek at the questions, but the grammar rules gave him a headache, and he quietly went back to his seat to glare at Jacob. Jacob ignored him and focused on Sophie. After half an hour, Sophie finished the simple test. Jacob took it from her, checked it, and within 2 minutes he discovered that Sophie's English was extremely poor. Seeing Jacob making big red marks all over her test paper, Sophie couldn't hold back. "Hey, I got so many questions wrong." "You have scored only 20 points out of 100, said Jacob, handing her the paper. "You did it on purpose." Sophie's face went pale as she looked at her paper. "Okay." Jacob took the test paper back, placed it on the table, and said, "Let's officially start your class." Sophie knew she needed the help, but somehow felt embarrassed in front of Jacob. "You did the second question wrong. Finish is a verb, and you need to polish it with the adverb quickly. And over here, it says that it's faster than other people, so it should be more quickly, not more quick." Jacob pointed at the second question that she got wrong and explained it to her. Sophie blushed. "I know. I was careless and read it wrong." Jacob went on with his corrections. "You need to use in for the proposition before the year, the month, the season, and the week. When talking about the date specifically, use on. If it's the particular arrival time, such as 5 o'clock, use at." "I know this too. I wasn't paying attention," Sophie quibbled. "And the fourth question. Sixth question. Seventh question. Eighth question." Jacob explained the questions, one by one, but Sophie was trying to give excuses and was slowly running out of them. She said that she read the question wrong or the question wasn't clear enough. All in all, she couldn't admit that her grammar was poor. In the end, even Kenneth couldn't sit still. He coughed 2 times and said, Soph, you need to pay more attention in class." "Third uncle, his test is way too difficult." Sophie's face was red as she spoke to Kenneth. Jacob was speechless. These questions were the simplest and most basic questions for high school English. Even first-year high school students could probably answer half of the questions. Kenneth had a bad temper, but he wasn't stupid. He looked at Sophie and knew that she had a bad foundation in English. Even he couldn't help but admit, "I think you need some tutoring." "Third uncle," Sophie whined as her face turned red, the kind Jacob found endearing. Jacob found himself controlling his blush. Kenneth said, "It's about time I leave. Your father should be back soon, Soph. I'll head back now so your father won't nag me." "Haha, third uncle, you're scared that my father will give you a lecture, aren't you?" Sophie's voice seemed chirpier as she teased her uncle. Kenneth felt a bit embarrassed at what had happened earlier that afternoon and said, "Anyhow, I'm going back home now." "Okay, I'll see you off." Sophie jumped out of her chair. "You can just walk me downstairs," Kenneth said as he walked out of Sophie's bedroom. He didn't even look at Jacob before leaving, let alone saying a goodbye. Jacob was now alone in Sophie's bedroom. He could hear Sophie's voice as she talked to her uncle. "He's not as bad as you think, Uncle. He is a sweet guy." Jacob smiled on hearing these words come out of Sophie's mouth. Helen seemed to have joined the conversation as she said, "Leaving, Kenneth? Dracon is almost back home. You don't want to say hi to him?" "I'll come to see him some other time. I just came to meet Sophie today," he replied. "You're afraid that he'll say you're not working on cultivation hard enough, right? Well, drive safe on your way back," said Helen kindly. Jacob was relieved to hear the main door shut, which indicated that Kenneth had finally left. Sophie came into the room a couple of minutes later and directly began complaining. "Geez, Jacob, you made me look so bad in front of third uncle." "I didn't do it on purpose. You actually got the questions wrong," he said, innocently. "Can't you pretend that I did them right?" She looked at Jacob angrily. Jacob smiled and couldn't control his blush this time. Sophie smiled back at him. "I think your third uncle hates me," Jacob confided in her. "Don't take it personally. He doesn't like any mortals." Sophie understood his feelings but was terrible at consoling. Jacob didn't know what to say, but his impression towards her third uncle went down even further. "He just thinks you're not a good match for me. You don't have to worry. He just says things but won't actually do anything to you." Sophie was straightforward. "I actually still don't know much about you guys. What exactly was the spirit concentration scroll that Elder Liam gave me the last time?" Jacob asked her. "That's the most basic cultivation technique. It doesn't actually do anything. It's simply for the purification of our body." Sophie looked at Jacob. "You've been cultivating for so many days now, and yet it seems like your body has had no reaction." It was now Sophie's turn to act bossy, because this was her area of expertise. "Didn't we have a deal? I tutor you, and you teach me the cultivation technique. If I cultivate poorly, it means that you are a bad teacher," Jacob said immediately. "Nonsense! I've never taught you before," Sophie glared back at him. "Then you can start now." Jacob sat down and looked at her. He seemed sincere, and so Sophie began talking. "The cultivation techniques in the Dragon Clan are divided into, these 8 levels. The highest Kyan level is also called the Heavenly level. Anyway, that's all you need to know right now. You're not even on the elementary level yet. After your body powers up to a certain level, my father or Elder Liam will pass on the real cultivation technique to you. And when you cultivate till Khan level, you will officially become a cultivator." Listening to her vague explanation, Jacob guessed that her cultivation was probably not that remarkable. In fact, Jacob was right about that. Sophie was totally uninterested in the cultivation techniques and only cultivated because she had to. But she did have an angst to prove herself, but she was just plain lazy. That was why she made a mistake the other day and fell into Jacob's arms despite Elder Liam supervising her. Jacob finally understood why Helen and Dracon wanted to punish Sophie for her carelessness. He also understood why they wanted him to spend time with her. It had more to do with just marriage. They wanted Sophie to be safe and become responsible. Keeping his thoughts aside, Jacob decided to continue with his questions. "Are there any dangers for me to learn your cultivation technique?" Jacob was genuinely concerned about this. "Of course there are dangers. You could break your arms or legs if you fall. You could even lose your life on the spot," Sophie said in a serious, no-nonsense tone. Jacob looked scared. "It's a good thing now, isn't it? You can be my replacement, and it'll be a lot easier for me," she giggled and teased Jacob. "Sure, I can be your replacement. I can face all the dangers instead of you. You are marrying me anyway. I can cultivate and share the core with you. You know, when we..." Jacob took out his thumbs and touched them together, giving Sophie a sly smile. Sophie proceeded to punch Jacob. Episode 20. Dragon Core's Power. Jacob dodged away and grabbed her dainty hand when Sophie tried to punch him. Surprisingly, Sophie had another strike waiting for him. She formed a fist with her other hand and aimed it at Jacob's stomach and punched him hard. She pulled her arm back and looked at Jacob fiercely. There was a knock at the door right at that moment, and both of them straightened themselves. "Come in," announced Sophie, and Dracon pushed open the door and entered. "How's the tutoring going?" he asked as he walked over to Jacob.
Jacob said as he rubbed his aching stomach. It's going pretty well, sir."
Sophie's face turned red as she didn't know what to say. "Sophie's English is very poor. We wanted to find her a tutor, but she wouldn't agree. That's why we had to ask you to help her study," Dracon said to Jacob.
"Yeah, she's working pretty hard," Jacob said.
Sophie looked at Jacob in surprise. She didn't think he would say something nice about her. "This little girl here is very notorious. She's actually smart, but she just doesn't work hard," Dracon said as he patted his daughter's head.
"Daddy,"
Sophie said as she looked at her shoes in embarrassment. Dracon looked at Jacob and said, "How's your cultivation going? Did the Spirit Concentration Scroll by Elder Liam work for you?" "Nothing seems to be happening," Jacob replied. "Take your time." He put his hand on Jacob's shoulder and said, "Come with me." He led Jacob to the attic on the top floor. Sophie was curious and followed them. This is Sophie's mother's studio at home, but she normally doesn't use it at night. After you finish tutoring Sophie, you can come here to cultivate, Dracon said. Jacob looked around. The studio was smaller than 10 square meters, but it was decorated elegantly and seemed cozy. It didn't feel small at all. Jacob noticed a triangular bookcase with all kinds of books about design. On the other side of the room, there was a flat table on which a variety of drawing equipment were kept for drafting. The chair was as green as spring grass, and it added an artistic ambiance to the tiny attic. Through the small window, one could view the backyard that was filled with vivid greens, and it looked very eye-pleasing. Dracon noticed Sophie pouting and asked, "What is it, darling?"
"Daddy, do you like Jacob more than me? I am not even allowed to enter this studio. Why is it that he can cultivate here?" Sophie said sourly.
"How about you do your homework here, and he gets to cultivate in your bedroom?" Dracon asked her.
"No way,"
said Sophie immediately. "That's right. Go do your homework now." Dracon meant business, and so Sophie left unwillingly. Dracon looked at Jacob and immediately began explaining the cultivation technique. There are actually 3 levels in the Spirit Concentration Scroll. The first level is to communicate with heaven and earth, feel the energy in nature, and purify your body at the same time. The second level is to guide the energy into your body. This process is very slow, but it really helps strengthen your body. The third level is to release the energy around your body. You can only cultivate other more formal cultivation techniques after passing the third level. Jacob looked at Dracon as he listened to him carefully, trying to memorize what he was saying. He finally understood that Dracon wanted to guide him with the cultivation himself and wasn't leaving it up to Sophie. The first level of communicating with heaven and earth also has some techniques to it. Dracon faced Jacob and explained clearly and slowly. Jacob was touched because he thought Dracon took some time out of his busy schedule to explain these terms to him. However, if the elders saw that the Dragon King was himself explaining these basic terms to Jacob, they would find this incredibly shocking. However, Jacob was utterly oblivious to Dracon's identity, barring the fact that he was a king. Jacob had no idea what the duties and powers his role entailed, and how revered and feared he was. Dracon's coaching was easy to understand, and Jacob learned a lot from him. Some things that he couldn't comprehend before became easier to understand. Sure enough, these kinds of things would be difficult for him to figure out all on his own. Jacob understood that Sophie would encounter a considerable amount of danger after 3 years, and within these 3 years, he also had to undertake the same amount of danger to save her life. Swallowing the internal core was a dangerous act. If he didn't follow through the Dragon Clan's cultivation technique to meditate and suppress the energy of the internal core, his body would explode sooner or later due to the growing power of the Dragon Core. Jacob now was more eager to cultivate than ever. According to Dracon, the Dragon Core innately contained the instinct of absorbing the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy. Therefore, it was also a supreme treasure of the world. A dragon's body was innately born with a dragon core. It is due to the core that the dragons become so strong and powerful. The time seemed to fly quickly as Jacob learned the cultivation technique with Dracon, and it was only 9:30 in the evening. "Sir, I should go back now. Our dorm's curfew is 10 o'clock. Jacob noticed the clock ticking and said hastily, "All right. I still have half of the technique left to explain, but we can talk about it tomorrow." Dracon led Jacob out of the studio. "All right, I'll come see you tomorrow then," said Jacob. "I'll drive you back," Dracon said in an undisputable tone. Jacob wanted to refuse at first, but he nodded because he thought Dracon had more to say to him. Helen and Jacob had already established an amicable relationship, but it was about time that he get to know his father-in-law as well. They stepped out of the house and Dracon got out his black Chevrolet from the garage. Jacob got in the car silently. As the car engine started, he waited for Dracon to begin talking. However, Dracon focused on driving the car and didn't say anything. Jacob had many questions, but somehow he couldn't muster up the courage to ask him anything. Dracon drove Jacob to the entrance of the dorm by 9:45. Seeing Dracon being so familiar with the campus roads, Jacob suddenly remembered that his group of companies in the mortal world were the biggest investors in his university. His firm donated heavily and was responsible for building the stadium, the library, and the new media building. Jacob kept getting impressed every minute in Dracon's presence. "Come again at the same time tomorrow and tutor Sophie after dinner," Dracon said after he parked at the entrance of the dorm. "Okay, thank you, sir," Jacob said as he got out of the car. Dracon nodded and drove away. Jacob dragged his feet to his dorm. He was tired. As soon as he reached his floor, Sam and others surrounded him. "Hey man, since when do you get round-trip services in fancy cars? Are you dating a rich girl?" "I'm not dating anyone. I just finished tutoring someone and her dad drove me back." Jacob tried to stay as honest as he could. "It's better to tell half the truth than to tell a whole lie," thought Jacob. "How come I never meet a rich girl? Not just rich, pretty, too. Rich girls are pretty anyhow." Sam seemed to be talking more to himself now. Jacob climbed up to his bed as Sam and the others babbled on about women. "Jacob's fortunes seem to be smiling down at him. A lot of women have been giving him attention this year. First, a cute girl comes to meet him on campus. Then the prettiest teacher in college, Susan, calls him to her office. And finally, the class president, Kathy, crushing on him." Jacob didn't want the conversation to continue, so he began pretending to read. But actually, he was just trying to adjust his state of mind. He was feeling enlightened after learning the cultivation technique and was eager to try it out. He began following Dracon's instructions and went deep into his concentration. He maintained the meditative state for a while and let the weak energy flow through the various acupoints in his body. The energy kept flowing from his head to toes and back till it finally reached the center of the body. The energy finally reached his abdomen where his internal dragon core was situated. As soon as the energy hit the internal core, The core began to vibrate, and the vibration could be felt throughout his body. The vibrations flowed in a faster, easier way now, like the pathways were cleared for it to flow. Jacob felt an internal knock on his forehead, and his body's vibrations seemed to be taking in the external energy. He felt strengthened as the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy flowed inside him. It kept flowing for a few minutes and then stopped for a few seconds. The energy then began to get distributed to the hundreds of acupoints in his body. His whole body suddenly became light. He felt illuminated as the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy that was difficult for him to sense earlier was finally filling up his body. It felt as if his body became a transparent sieve. He couldn't keep the energy, but was also not an obstacle to it. It felt like he was rising higher and higher to an inextinguishable power. The feeling of clarity that came from this power was way more refreshing than swallowing 100 peppermints. Jacob tried to enjoy this refreshing experience. He didn't expect the breakthrough of the Spirit Concentration Scroll's first level would be this easy.